This is ABC News legal analyst Royal Oakes welcoming you to Hinshaw and Culbertson's Insurance Law Program, where we discuss insurance and reinsurance issues of interest to industry professionals. Here's your host, the co-chair of Hinshaw's Global Insurance Services Practice Group, Scott Seaman.
On this episode of Hinshaw Insurance Law TV, we are celebrating America 250 and the role insurance has played in America. My partners, Pedro Hernandez, Peter Lewis, and I co-authored a book called America 250, The History of Insurance and Insurance Coverage Law and Litigation in the United States. That's a very snappy title. The book covers a lot of ground on the history of insurance, the development of various lines of insurance, the regulation of insurance, the increasing underlying liabilities that have led to high stakes insurance coverage disputes, these golden ages of the insurance coverage wars, and we bring it forward to discuss in detail many of the issues and claim types driving contemporary insurance coverage disputes. And to top it off, we also provide our nominations for the most significant insurance law decisions in the history of the United States. And joining us is one of my co-authors, Peter Lewis. Peter is one of our young, brilliant guns. He's a partner based in our Fort Lauderdale office, and his practice focuses on insurance coverage, bad faith, and aviation law. So, Peter, I was around for the bicentennial, and I remember it quite well, but I was too young to view it from a legal or an insurance perspective. It was mostly about the parting. But Peter, you weren't around then, but you're going to get even with me because you will be here to write the book on the tricentennial, and I will be long gone. America is the land of the free, the home of the brave. Some say America is more than a place, it's an idea. I say it's not just an idea, it's an idea that's in action. America is a country that allows for free thought and expression, provides an opportunity for us to rise above the class in which we were born. It allows us to self-actualize in Maslow's terminology, I think, more than any other country. America is the great bastion of hope and opportunity. And we're not a perfect nation, but when we see injustice, when we see unfairness, we can call it out, we can correct it, and nowhere in the world do people work harder than in America to look out for others. No people are more resourceful or more generous than the American people, and that's the short version of what America means to me. So, Peter, why don't we start out with your view, what America means to you, and what America 250 means to you?
Sure, and thanks, Scott. I'm happy to be here and to discuss this topic with you. Uh, just briefly stated, what America means to me is exactly what you said. It's the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's a place where everyone is equal under the eyes of the law, where anybody can go into a courtroom and have justice served properly, regardless of their stature or who they are, their background. And it's the land of opportunity, too, where anybody can become whoever they want to be and can fulfill their dreams based on hard work, determination, effort, and working together with their fellow Americans. Turning to America 250, this was a great opportunity to examine the role America played in the development of insurance, and what I would say is more importantly, the role insurance has played in the development, growth, and grandeur of America. Insurance, insurers, insurance professionals, though they're normally popular scapegoats and common targets for criticism, have contributed mightily to the economic success, stability, and endurance of our country. Although mass media and the common man may not acknowledge it, insurance has played and earned a prominent seat at America's birthday. And if we were going to give out a slice of America's birthday cake, I would submit that insurance and the insurance industry as a whole should get a large slice of that cake.
And
Insurance has been
nobody,
around.
I was going to say, nobody loves birthday cake more than me, especially buttercream.
Yeah. Well, I'm partial to red velvet and put some blueberries on it. Get a nice red, white, and blue cake.
It's not bad either.
Yeah. But Scott, I'd like to note also that, insurance does predate the founding of our country. And it wasn't invented in America, and it certainly wasn't perfected in America, but America's put its own stamp on insurance. And I'd like to conclude, I guess, at this point that the future of the United States insurance industry is bright because the future of America is bright.
I think that that's entirely correct. And in our book, we go into quite a bit of detail of how merchant marine insurers really funded and got the country off to its start. And throughout the years, apart from issuing insurance policies, insurers have set a lot of standards, and their loss control activities have saved a lot of lives and a lot of property. And of course, it's insurers that people turn to when there's a mass disaster. And so insurance figures prominently in our economic success in society. And without insurance, which has really been the backbone for industry and invention, the variety and the quantum of goods and services would be a lot less than what it is and what it has been over the years. So it's our chance to salute insurers. Uh, but let's talk for a moment. If we had been practicing insurance law before the 1980s, we would not be participating in this high stakes, complex coverage litigation we're involved in today. Generally, it was the period of the 1980s that ushered in big time coverage litigation. And I wanted to get your take, Peter, on what coverage disputes look like before the 1980s and where it's evolved since the 1980s.
Well, great. So, Scott, one of my favorite parts of this project was that this portion, particularly predating the 1980s, predates me. And so it was a chance for me to go back and look at how insurance litigation has evolved over time in the United States. And the potential for coverage litigation has always existed, especially whenever an insurer denies coverage for a claim. Yet, as we discuss in the book, for most of recorded world history, and even in the United States, coverage litigation wasn't very common. And rarely did individual policyholders have the financial means to engage in protracted coverage litigation. And most individual and corporate policy disputes were resolved, well, some will call it amicably, but maybe without court intervention. However, legal developments and increasing liabilities beginning around the 1970s ushered in what you taught me is the term of the golden ages of insurance coverage wars that began in the second half of the 80s and continued to now. We saw large environmental, product, professional liability, D&O, meaning directors and officers liability, toxic tort claims fueled waves of coverage litigation. And by the same token, large asbestos and environmental liabilities gave birth to long-tail claims. And long-tail claims, in turn, set into motion the age of high-stakes insurance coverage litigation. And so we've started to see an increase in the stakes and the sophistication and the cost of coverage litigation through this time period.
Yeah, and the issues multiplied, the number of insurers involved in the disputes, the number of policies with long tail claims increased, and a bunch of new issues entered into the arena, ones that are near and dear to our hearts, like trigger and allocation and exhaustion. And also, wherever there's money and the stakes are high, policyholders sometimes of necessity were forced to bring coverage litigation. And it also brought a lot of higher priced legal talent into the world of insurance coverage, thank goodness. And so that's where we are. And with any luck, these golden ages of the insurance coverage wars will continue for a long period of time. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share briefly about the development of some of the specific lines of insurance, because the U.S. played a big role in some lines of coverage more than others.
I don't really have any particular lines that I want to discuss, but I think in terms of big claims or big trends that we saw, and the United States did not invent liability or claims, but it did elevate them to a new level and gain separation from the rest of the world by creating what I think we call mega liability here. And I think product liability and strict liability in tort led to, mass tort litigation and rising insurance costs. And you can't discuss the history of insurance litigation in the United States without discussing asbestos. And many candidates, since asbestos has started, and asbestos is still around today, but since the asbestos litigation came into the United States, there have been many candidates that have been proposed to be the next asbestos, and many fall short. I mean, what comes to mind is benzene, electromagnetic fields, and I was a little too young for the litigation in this, but I do remember very well Y2K
What a
and how
flop. I wrote a beautiful article about Y2K, and then nothing ever came of it.
I remember sitting in my living room in the middle of nowhere, Maine, where I grew up, watching the ball drop and expecting the world to just kind of, fall with it. And nothing happened. Happily so.
Yeah, it was a
But
big dud.
but there is
So,
one that I'd like to
yeah.
add to, Scott, if I could. I mean, we talk about PFAS a lot, and I won't even try to say the name of the chemical compound, but that might serve to be the next kind of asbestos, where you see this subtype of environmental claim, kind of quasi product as well. And there's a substantial amount of liabilities and coverage actions that are continuing to this day.
And it sort of is the perfect storm because it's more ubiquitous even than asbestos, and it's not limited to environment to industrial exposures. It includes industrial exposures, but a lot of consumer products. So there's a lot of direct exposure for consumers and environmental exposures, and something along the lines of 95% of people have signs of exposure to PFAS, which doesn't equate necessarily to injury, but it does show a lot of exposure. And then you add on that the fact that the stuff's been around since the 40s and 50s, and it's been only recently in the last several years that government entities have been involved in the regulation. So there's a lot of it out there. And you're right, that's one of the areas that might be the next asbestos. And one of the things we looked at, Peter, in our book was some of America's key contributions to insurance law. And three of them I'm going to list and then just get your take on them is the duty to defend, which is fairly unique to the US, bad faith and extra contractual liability, and then what I'll call social inflation and litigation American style. Each of these topics could consume an hour or two of healthy discussion, but provide us with your take, starting with the duty to defend.
Sure. Well, the duty to defend represents a distinctly American contribution, namely the principle that an insurer must act upon even the mere possibility of coverage. And to expand upon that a little more for those who are not familiar, there is this rule that's sometimes called the four corners rule or the eight corners rule, depending where you are. But generally speaking, across the United States, the duty to defend, meaning a liability insurer must defend its insured or policyholder, additional insured, etc., based on the allegations of the complaint compared with the policy. And in almost all states, all doubts that may be presented by a coverage question are resolved in favor of the policyholder. And that's a unique American concept.
It really is. From the standpoint of, I think only the US and Canada actually have a duty to defend, is distinct from a duty to indemnify for defense costs, which exist in the US and other countries as well. But we've taken a look in another separate publication, but also in this book, at the top 10 or 11 issues presented with duty to defend. And you can look at it state by state and see the complexities that contributes to coverage litigation and to insurers' obligations. What about bad faith and extra contractual liabilities?
Well, this is another one of America's unique contributions to insurance law. And it dates back to a case back in California, and I believe in 1958, which applied the concept or the legal idea of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. holding that an insurer's refusal to defend or settle within the policy limits when it was reasonable to do so constitutes a breach of that implied covenant. And so that, through subsequent developments across the states, led to an expansion of bad faith law in the 1980s, 90s, and we're still seeing it developed today, where we had this expansion in the 1980s and 90s, where now maybe we're starting to see some states rein it back in through tort reform and the like. And the genesis of this bad faith or extra contractual claims was really that breach of contract damages, meaning just putting parties back in the position that they should have been, weren't enough. And so what claimants were looking for was more money, or insureds were looking for was more money. And so they looked to the insurance companies to pay for that. And that has led to large litigation across the country in all different lines of insurance.
And there's first party bad faith, third party bad faith, institutional bad faith theories, duty, breach of the duty. And when we talk about bad faith, of course, it's actually the breach of the duty, good faith, and fair dealing. It's common law in some states. It's by statute in other states. Some states, there's not very much bad faith liability at all. And in other states, it's huge exposures for insurance companies. So we do talk a lot about bad faith and the fact that, again, it's something fairly unique to the United States. The other sort of major element that's unique to the U.S. is social inflation and our civil litigation system, which includes juries and the potential for in some causes of action for punitive damages. But social inflation has really been out of control in the U.S. and it's amped up after the courts reopened following the COVID-19 pandemic. But you see a little bit of it across the pond, but nowhere near the extent that you see in the U.S. What are some of your high-level thoughts on social inflation?
Well, social inflation is real whether people want to acknowledge it or not. I mean, what we call nuclear verdicts rose by over 50% in 2024. And then we've seen mega verdicts increasing through the years through many states. And the impact has certainly been felt in the United States. And I believe that's attributable, at least in part, to our civil justice system, in that the framers of the Constitution, so if we're going way back in celebrating America's history, set up this system that the courts would check the executive by applying the correct interpretation of the law. So it's designed to provide a fair and impartial adjudication. But social inflation seems to, at least in part, distorted that system. Jurors are more inclined to render awards with less emphasis on fault, but greater emphasis on reputation and other factors such as safety practices and perceived culpability. And to combat this social inflation that's rising, we've seen the tort reform that I referenced earlier. That's come in some states, but other states are slower to adopt this system.
Yeah. And so we talk a lot about social inflation. We talk about the factors unique to the American system of justice. We talk about societal factors and trends and things like reptilian tactics and third-party litigation funding, which, up until a couple of decades ago was generally precluded under the doctrine of champerty in most of the U.S. states. So it's something that insurers and their lawyers have to contend with, and it's something that policyholders have to deal with. There's sort of two levels. There's the level and the underlying liabilities, and then there's the social inflation we see that's aimed directly at insurers in terms of broad policy interpretations, in terms of time-limited demands, and other things that are directed by policyholders to insurers. So there we're not in the same boat. We're in different boats rowing in opposite directions. Let's just, we spend some time in the book talking about a lot of the contemporary issues, environmental Coverage litigation and environmental liabilities continue to loom large, and in addition to the traditional ones, there's climate change.
So climate change, it's a really hot topic item here, and unfortunately it's become politicized, but regardless, it's had an impact on insurance and particularly in stability of insurance. As we see climates change in, say, California, Florida, where I live, where there's tends to be a lot of hurricanes, but now we're seeing forest fires and wildfires in Louisiana, as well as you see a lot of flooding. And those have led to rising premiums, some insurers having to withdraw from certain states and insolvencies. And my understanding is that between 2018 and 2023, insurers canceled or renewed nearly 2 million policies in these states. And so that's a real world impact and effect. And we get a lot of media attention on this, and it's in politics and discussed every day. But really, I think we've only seen two major decisions, or at least two that we've chosen to highlight. One in Virginia that found that an insurer had no duty to defend against a climate change lawsuit arising out of like greenhouse gases. And then a Hawaii Supreme Court case that said that there was no duty to defend based on climate change related cases. But the court did rule in favor of the policyholder on the occurrence issue in the Hawaii case. So we're starting to see, I guess, more and more of these cases being filed in the US. And I don't necessarily see that happening across the globe.
Yeah, and I mean, so far, climate change has been much more significant to the extent it's a factor in giving rise to weather-related claims than separate claims for greenhouse gases. But, we're still waiting for that explosion to take place. One of your areas of focus is aviation. Why don't you just give us a quick take on U.S. aviation coverage?
Sure. Well, aviation insurance and coverage is, when we're talking in the broader scheme of insurance in general, is new, right? I mean, we've only been, as humans, flying for a little over a century, right? And while marine travel has been going on for thousands of years, this is something that's relatively new. And the industry in the United States has been heavily influenced by the London market. Well, the London market has their own terms and slips and conditions, etc. And that was served as kind of the basis for the United States, which has since evolved to have their own terms and conditions and the like. And it, particularly in the aviation industry, where technology has just fueled such rapid changes, right? We start with the Wright brothers flying on a beach for a couple 100 feet and turning to now we have subsonic jets and you can fly anywhere across the world. And so as technology has changed, so has insurance. And the weather risks, well, risks have become, generally speaking, less riskier to insure. But then there's still we've seen lots of different events throughout these 100 years. We saw a lot of hijacking and claims in the 70s, maybe a little bit into the 80s. And then, of course, 9/11 having a big impact, being the costliest disaster in aviation insurance history. And then nowadays, we're seeing things like what people call drones or unmanned aerial systems, becoming more and more part of daily life. People can get their packages delivered from Walmart or Amazon by a drone instead of your, postal worker. And so as those technological changes occur, we're starting to see changes in the types of products that are written, and then also in the premiums, charged.
Yeah. And one of the focuses of the book, we sort of track the history of insurance regulation. And, so climate change, after the asbestos and environmental explosion, where there were a lot of insurer insolvencies, the regulators really got control over financial security of insurers for a long period of time. But then with some of these weather-related issues, as you pointed out, in California, the inability to increase premiums, in other states, other reasons. We've seen that. And of course, with drones, and we're potentially up against issues of national security With cyber, same thing, and when there's state actors involved. So it does impact regulatory as well as insurance claims and the content of insurance policies. One of the big things, Peter, of course, is cyber and artificial intelligence. And I think one of the big challenges insurers are going to be facing for the next few decades is dealing with labor shortages, as the uh, old generations, including baby boomers, are exiting, and younger generations don't seem to have all the skill sets that baby boomers had, and also don't find the insurance industry to be maybe as sexy as some other industries. One of the areas insurers are turning to is dealing with artificial intelligence, and they're doing that on the business side, and they're also addressing that on the claim side, on the issues that their policyholders are confronting. Why don't you share a few thoughts on
Sure.
AI?
Well, AI is here, whether people want to accept it or not. It's here, and it's
It
something
came
that's
upon
being
us pretty quickly.
it did. And I remember growing up watching Terminator and those types of things and being a little concerned about it. But we're not there yet, fortunately. Though it is playing a part in our daily life. I use it almost every day, as a lawyer in our insurance law firm. And insurance companies are starting to adopt it, like you said, on the business side, meaning like maybe underwriting, where artificial intelligence can provide quicker quotes based on certain algorithms and formulas. And it's also being used on the claims handling side, in terms of evaluating the value of claims. And it's something that we're going to have to continually adapt to. And I can see that impacting not just the business side of insurance, but also the litigation side of it as well, where there's more liabilities and opportunities for claimants to seek a payday.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of activity in coverage and bad faith litigation, a lot of discovery directed at AI, and insurers are subject to claims for AI and how they use it and how they track it, and also when they don't use it. So it's going to be a fertile area, I think, for years to come. And how insurers are able to deal with those challenges will be a big determinant of their success in the future. And of course, it also provides opportunities to provide services and products for our policyholders.
So
So, sort of on a final note, where do you see, put on your fortune telling cap and tell us where you foresee coverage disputes and litigation heading over the next few years?
sure, if I were to have a crystal ball, I would foresee that insurance coverage disputes will continue. I think that this has been an area where the plaintiff's bar and the plaintiff's bar can continue to make money and to make headway. Um, by the same token, though, just like as America develops, as technology develops, so does the insurance industry. And so the insurance industry will be adapting to changes, in our cultural life, technological advances, and the like. So we're going to continue to see, I think, coverage litigation broadly continue to expand as the world changes, as life changes. And I think that we're going to continue to see, extra contractual bad faith lawsuits. And we may not go back to golden ages of coverage wars circa the 1980s, but there's certainly, as long as there's insurance, there's going to be litigation and claims.
Yes, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see it always. These are always interesting times. But what I say is that it's always been the genius and the hard work of insurance professionals that has gotten us through the first 250 years with rapid technological changes, legal changes, changes in liability, social inflation. And it's those same skill sets and that same talent that I think will serve the industry well for the next 250 years. And we do provide a lot of tips, a lot of thoughts about limiting bad faith exposure and steps insurers can take with respect to cyber and artificial intelligence. So a lot of good information out there. Hopefully Not only will insurance professionals and attorneys find it to be interesting, but hopefully historians and corporate executives and the general public will find something of interest. But Peter, I thank you for joining us on Hinshaw Insurance Law and also for co-writing the book. It was a lot of work, but I think the results, and if people want to see what you look like and what I look like back in the 1600s and 1700s, they could look at the covers to the book.
Thank you for having me, Scott, and also for working with me on this project. It was a fascinating project and one that I truly enjoyed because I'm a fan of American history, of this country in general, and insurance. So this was a great intersection of all three.
Absolutely. And a shout out to Pedro Hernandez, our other author of this book. And we'd like to thank everybody for joining us on Hinshaw Insurance Law and bid you adieu by saying happy birthday, America.
You've been listening to Hinshaw & Culbertson LLP's Insurance Law Radio. The information contained in this program is provided solely for general informational purposes and does not constitute legal advice. For information on past and upcoming Insurance Law Radio programs, visit the Insurance Services Practice Group page of www.hinshawlaw.com. This is Royal Oaks thanking you for joining us and inviting you to join us for the next episode of Insurance Law Radio.